What if a single, cryptic phone call could unravel a mystery that had been cold for years? What if that call was a ghost's whisper, a voice from a young man who, by all accounts, had simply vanished from the face of the earth? We've all heard stories of people disappearing without a trace, their lives becoming question marks in the public record. But what happens when one of those question marks suddenly speaks? Today, we delve into a case that twists and turns down the darkest of roads, a story we call The Trip of No Return. It's a story about a dedicated father, a loyal son, and a powerful family with secrets buried deeper than any grave. It's a journey that begins with a single, chilling phone call from a 21-year-old, a call that reopened a case everyone else had given up on. If you're a fan of intricate mysteries and suspense that will keep you on the edge of your seat, now is the time to make sure you're subscribed to the channel and have those notification bells on. Trust me, you won't want to miss a single second of this. Now, let's begin. The rain that fell on the city of Northwood that Tuesday had a certain kind of persistence, a grim determination to wash away the autumn leaves and turn the streets into slick, black mirrors reflecting the melancholic gray sky. It was the kind of weather that made old pains ache and new anxieties feel perfectly at home. For Liam O'Connell, it was perfect writing weather. He sat in his small, soundproofed home studio, the soft glow of his monitors a stark contrast to the gloom outside. A half-empty mug of coffee, long gone cold, stood sentinel beside his keyboard. On the screen was the timeline for his latest podcast episode, a complex weave of audio clips, musical cues, and his own narration. The show was called Echoes of the Lost, and it was Liam's obsession, his penance, and his livelihood, all rolled into one. He'd once been a respected journalist for the Northwood Chronicle, chasing down leads with a fire in his belly. But that fire had been doused 5 years ago by a case that broke him, a case that had no answers, no closure, and no justice. The disappearance of Arthur Pendleton. After that, the daily grind of city council meetings and press releases felt hollow. So, he'd cashed in his savings, built this studio in his spare bedroom, and dedicated himself to the stories no one else wanted to tell anymore, the stories of the missing. Arthur Pendleton's story was the ghost that haunted the very foundation of Liam's new career. Arthur was 53, a taxi driver with a quiet demeanor and a reputation for being unwaveringly reliable. He wasn't the kind of man to make enemies. His life was his cab, his small, tidy apartment, and his 16-year-old son, Leo. Then, one October night 5 years ago, he'd vanished. His last dispatch was a pickup request from the opulent Blackwood Manor, the ancestral home of the Vance family, a dynasty that had its fingers in every lucrative pie in the state. The official record stated that Arthur's cab was seen on a traffic camera heading towards the estate, but it was never seen leaving. He never arrived for the pickup. Elias Vance, the heir to the family fortune, told police he waited for half an hour before calling another service. Arthur Pendleton and his yellow cab, number 237, had simply driven off the map. The police investigated, of course. They searched the winding roads around the Vance estate, dragged nearby rivers, and questioned a stoic Elias Vance, who offered nothing but polite, rehearsed condolences. They found no leads, no suspects, no motive. Arthur's bank accounts remained untouched. His life was an open book with a bafflingly blank final page. For his son, Leo, it was a cataclysm. Liam had interviewed the boy back then, a raw-boned teenager with his father's gentle eyes, burning with a desperate, frantic energy. Leo refused to believe his father had just left. "He wouldn't do that," he'd said, his voice cracking. "Someone took him. I know it. It has to be them. The Vances." But with no evidence. His accusations were just the grief-stricken cries of a boy who'd lost his entire world. The case went cold, filed away in a cabinet of unsolved sorrows. Liam wrote his final article on it, a somber piece on the 1-year anniversary of the disappearance. The city moved on, but Liam couldn't. The injustice of it, the sheer impossibility of a man and his car simply ceasing to exist, became a stone in his shoe, a constant nagging irritant. Then, 2 years after his father's disappearance, Leo Pendleton, now 18, also vanished. There was no drama, No signs of a struggle. His landlord found his apartment empty, rent unpaid. His meager belongings were still there, as if he'd just stepped out for a moment. To the police, it was the sad, predictable end to a tragic story. A troubled kid, unable to cope, had likely run away to start over or worse. The file on the Pendletons, father and son, was unofficially closed. Until this morning, an email had arrived at the generic tipline address Liam had set up for the podcast. The sender was anonymous, the address a jumble of nonsensical letters and numbers. The subject line was just 2 words, Arthur Pendleton. Liam's heart had hammered against his ribs. He still got tips about the case from time to time, crank theories, false sightings, but something about this felt different. The email's body was as sparse as the subject line. You were the only one who seemed to care. I think this belongs to you. It's a call Leo made. I've held onto it for too long. I'm sorry. I'm afraid. Attached was a single audio file. Voicemail_22.wave. Liam had let the rain drum against his window for a full minute before he dared to click it. He slipped on his professional-grade headphones, isolating himself from the world, and pressed play. The recording was short, barely 45 seconds, and shrouded in a thick layer of static and a strange, rhythmic clanking, like machinery in a state of disrepair. Then, a voice cut through the noise, young and breathless with panic. It was a voice Liam hadn't heard in years, but one he recognized instantly. It was Leo Pendleton. He sounded older, his voice having dropped to a man's register, but the undertone of frantic terror was the same. He was talking to someone, his words tumbling over each other in a desperate rush. Can't talk long, Leo's voice stammered, the audio quality wavering. He's not who he says he is. None of them are. They lied. All of them. About that night. A pause, a sharp intake of breath. The clanking sound grew louder for a moment. It wasn't a pickup. It was a trade. My dad knew something. Another voice, a muffled, older male voice on the other end of the line, was indecipherable, a mere murmur beneath Leo's panic. Listen to me, Leo pleaded, his voice cracking with strain. The old mill, the one by the creek on their land. It's about the water, always about the water. He drove the car in himself. They made him. Another pause, as if he were listening. I found it. I found his logbook. The real one. The clanking sound was suddenly very close, followed by a sharp, metallic clang. Oh God! I have to go. Elias Vance. Tell them it was Elias Vance. He knows the call ended. Not a disconnect, but an abrupt, violent cut, as if the phone had been shattered. Liam sat in the ringing silence, the phantom static still hissing in his ears. He played it again, and again. Each time a new detail snagged his attention. The sound of clanking machinery. Leo's assertion that his father knew something. The mention of a real logbook. And the final, chilling, unfinished sentence. He knows I'm here. This wasn't a runaway. This was a young man who had continued his own investigation. A boy who had gone to war for his father and had gotten too close to the fire. This audio file was a message in a bottle, thrown into the digital ocean from a sinking ship. The date of the recording was 2 years ago, right around the time Leo had disappeared. His journalistic instincts, long dormant, roared back to life. He spent the next hour cleaning the audio, using software to strip away the layers of static and amplify Leo's voice. The clanking sound became clearer. It was irregular. The sound of old, heavy metal parts grinding against each other. The old mill. He pulled up satellite maps of Northwood and the surrounding county. Blackwood Manor, the Vance estate, was a sprawling, 500-acre swath of pristine forest and manicured lawns about 10 miles outside the city. It was bordered on the north by the Blackwood River. And right there, on the western edge of the property, nestled in a forgotten corner where a small creek fed into the river, were the derelict ruins of the Northwood paper mill, which had been shut down in the 70s. It was part of the Vance property, bought decades ago and left to rot. Next, he needed to talk to the one person who might have felt the same stone in her shoe as he did. Detective Sarah Jenkins had been the lead investigator on the Pendleton case. She was a cop of the old school, thorough, cynical, and possessing a bloodhound's nose for deceit. The case had been her white whale. She'd butted heads with her superiors, who were wary of angering the Van Cess, and had been quietly pushed into early retirement a year after Arthur vanished. Liam found her number and dialed, his heart thumping a nervous rhythm. She answered on the third ring, her voice as gravelly and no-nonsense as he remembered. "Jenkins. Detective, it's Liam O'Connell, formerly of the Chronicle." A short, dry chuckle on the other end. "Formerly. We've all got a formerly, don't we, O'Connell? What do you want?" "I don't do interviews for your spooky little radio show. It's about Arthur Pendleton," Liam said, cutting to the chase. The silence that followed was heavy with meaning. "What about him?" Sarah's voice had lost its sardonic edge, replaced by a cautious, weary interest. "I received a communication from his son, Leo." He could almost hear her sit up straighter. "Leo? He's been gone for 2 years. What kind of communication?" "A recording of a phone call he made right before he disappeared. He mentions you. Not by name, but he says he tried to tell the police, but no one would listen. He talks about his father, the Van Cess, and an old mill on their property." "The paper mill," Sarah breathed, her voice a low whisper. "I wanted to search that place. The brass said no. It was private property, no probable cause. The Van Cess lawyers would have had my badge for breakfast." "He said something else, Sarah," Liam continued, his own voice dropping. "He said, it's about the water." He drove the car in himself. "They made him." Another profound silence. Liam pictured her, a woman in her late 60s, with sharp gray eyes and a face etched with the ghosts of 1,000 bad cases, staring out her own window at the rain. "A confession in the water," she murmured, more to herself than to him. "It's what we always thought. A deep quarry, the river. But we dragged every accessible part. The grounds themselves. We never got a warrant for a full search." "I have the audio, Sarah." "Compelling. It's the voice of a terrified kid who found something he shouldn't have." "And what do you plan to do with it, O'Connell? Take it to the cops? They'll laugh you out of the building." "An anonymous email with a 2-year-old recording? It's hearsay from a ghost." "That's why I'm calling you," Liam said. "You know the case better than anyone. The files, the people, the politics. I want to go out there. To the mill." He expected her to tell him he was crazy, to warn him off. Instead, she let out a long, slow sigh. "The Vance family," she said, her voice laced with a deep, old bitterness. "They own this city, from the mayor's office to the dog catcher. They're like a beautiful old oak tree, all majestic and grand. But their roots are rotten, and they've poisoned the ground for miles around. Elias Vance, the son, he's the worst of them, all that inherited grace and charm, but his eyes are cold as a winter lake. So you'll help you get yourself killed? Maybe," she grunted. "Don't go there alone, you idiot. I've still got a few contacts, a few favors I can call in to see if there's been any new activity reported out that way. But if you're set on this, meet me tomorrow morning. 7 a.m. a diner called the Rusty Spoon, out on Highway 3. We'll go have a look. And O'Connell. Yeah. Bring a good flashlight. And boots you don't mind getting dirty." She hung up. Liam leaned back in his chair, the tension in his shoulders easing for the first time all day. He wasn't alone in this anymore. He looked back at his monitor, at the waveform of Leo Pendleton's last known words. An echo in the static. A voice that had waited 2 years to be heard. The trip of no return had a new passenger. And for the first time in 5 years, Liam felt like he was finally in the driver's seat. He opened a new document, the cursor blinking, waiting. He typed the first line of his new investigation notes. Key clue, a 21-year-old strange call. He spent the rest of the night poring over his old files, the box of notes and clippings from his reporting days that he'd kept in the back of his closet. He cross-referenced every name, every location. He read his own articles, the words of a younger, more optimistic man. He looked at the photos. Arthur Pendleton, a soft, smiling man in his driver's uniform, leaning against his cab. Leo, a lanky teenager with a skateboard, squinting in the sun, a photo taken before his world had been torn apart. The Vances were a fortress. He found old society pages featuring Elias Vance at charity galas. His smile perfect, his eyes vacant. He was the public face of Vance Industries, a sprawling conglomerate with interests in everything from pharmaceuticals to private logistics. Reading between the lines of their corporate history, Liam saw a pattern of ruthless acquisitions, hostile takeovers, and lawsuits that were quietly settled out of court. They were professionals at making problems disappear. Had Arthur Pendleton just been another problem? According to Leo's frantic call, his father knew something. It wasn't a random fare. It was personal. What could a simple taxi driver know about a family like the Vances? Liam pulled up Arthur's employment history. He'd been a driver for Northwood Cabs for 15 years. Before that, the records were thin. A series of odd jobs. And before that, a 10-year gap in his early 20s. What had he done during that time? The question hung in the air of the quiet studio. Outside, the rain had finally stopped. The city was hushed, sleeping. But for Liam O'Connell, the night was just beginning. The ghosts of Arthur and Leo Pendleton were in the room with him now, and they were demanding answers. The trip to the old mill tomorrow wasn't just about a podcast anymore. It was about finishing a story that had been cut off mid-sentence, 5 years too soon. And he had a chilling premonition that the final chapter would be written in a place of rust, shadows, and secrets that were never meant to see the light of day. The Rusty Spoon was exactly as its name suggested. A long, low building by the side of the highway, its metal sign flecked with corrosion, its windows steamy in the crisp morning air. It smelled of frying bacon, old coffee, and the faint, lingering scent of yesterday's regrets. Liam found Sarah Jenkins in a booth at the back, a half-empty mug cradled in her hands. She looked smaller than he remembered, but her eyes were just as sharp, scanning the diner with a cop's practiced vigilance. "O'Connell," she greeted him, her voice a low rumble. "You look like you haven't slept." "The dead don't keep regular hours," Liam replied, sliding into the booth opposite her. A waitress appeared, poured him a coffee without asking, and vanished just as quickly. "You brought the recording?" Sarah asked, ignoring his attempt at gallows humor. Liam nodded, pulling a small, powerful audio player from his jacket pocket and sliding it across the table. He passed her a set of earbuds. She put them in, her expression unreadable, and he pressed play. As Leo's terrified voice filled the silence between them, Liam watched her face. A flicker in her eyes at the mention of the mill. A tightening of her jaw at the name Elias Vance. A deep, weary sadness when the call abruptly ended. She took the earbuds out and pushed the player back to him. She was silent for a long moment, staring into her coffee cup as if the answers were floating in its murky depths. "The clanking," she said finally. "The old conveyor system in the mill's main processing floor. It's rusted to hell, but the wind catches the loose metal panels on the roof and makes them bang against the chain gears. Creates a sound, like a broken clock, ticking out of time. She had been there before. She knew the sound. They had denied her a search, but she had done her own reconnaissance. So Leo was there, Liam stated, the confirmation sending a chill through him despite the warm coffee. He was there, she agreed, and he was terrified. He wasn't running away, O'Connell. He was hunting. She took a sip of her coffee. "I did some digging after you called. Pulled on a few old strings. The Vance family filed a trespassing complaint 2 years ago, right around the time Leo went missing. Vagrants on the old mill property. They had private security sweep the place. The security team was a new one, not their usual local guys. A private military contractor type out of the city. The kind you hire when you want a job done quietly and without a paper trail. The official report said they found a squatter's camp and cleared it out. Nothing else." "A squatter's camp," Liam repeated, the words tasting like ash. "That was Leo. And they found him," Sarah finished, her voice grim. That call was his last Hail Mary. He knew they were closing in. They finished their coffee in silence, the unspoken truth of Leo's fate hanging between them. He hadn't just disappeared. He'd been erased. Sarah's car was a beat-up sedan that had seen better decades, but its engine turned over with a reliable grumble. She drove with an unnerving calm, her hands steady on the wheel as she navigated the winding country roads leading towards the Vance estate. "The main entrance is watched," she explained, her eyes flicking to the rearview mirror. "Private security cameras in the trees. We're not going in the front door." She took a turn onto an unmarked, overgrown service road, the car's tires crunching over gravel and fallen leaves. Branches scraped against the windows like skeletal fingers. After another mile, she pulled over in a small clearing, hidden from the main road. "We walk from here, about a quarter mile through the woods. Stay quiet." The air in the woods was cold and damp, smelling of wet earth and decay. The silence was absolute, broken only by the snap of twigs under their boots. Liam's city senses were on high alert. Every rustle of leaves sounded like a footstep. Every shadow seemed to hold a human form. Sarah moved with a practiced ease, her steps sure and silent, her eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. She was back in her element. The rhythmic, metallic clanking that Liam had heard on the recording was real, an eerie, lonely sound carried on the wind. "The belly of the beast," Sarah said, her hand resting on the holstered pistol Liam now noticed under her jacket. "Watch your step. The floors are rotted through in places." They entered through a collapsed wall, stepping into a cavernous main chamber. Sunlight streamed in through holes in the roof, illuminating swirling dust motes. A massive, rusted conveyor chain snaked through the room, suspended from the ceiling, its metal plates groaning as the wind blew through the building. This was the source of the noise. The place felt like a cathedral of decay, and Liam couldn't shake the feeling that they were intruders in a place that held a terrible sanctity. "So if Leo was here, where was his camp?" Liam asked, his voice hushed. "Somewhere hidden. Somewhere with a vantage point," Sarah said, her gaze sweeping the upper levels, the catwalks, the network of smaller offices that overlooked the main floor. "He was watching something, or someone." They spent the next hour meticulously searching the ground floor, finding nothing but rust, rubble, and the ghosts of forgotten industry. They moved towards a set of rickety metal stairs leading to the second-floor offices. As they ascended, a floorboard on the landing above them creaked. Instantly, Sarah froze, pulling Liam back against the wall. She drew her weapon, her movements fluid and silent. They stood there for a full minute, listening. The only sound was the wind and the clanking of the conveyor. Liam's heart was a frantic drum against his ribs. "Probably just a loose board," he whispered, trying to convince himself. "Maybe," she whispered back, not lowering her gun. "But this place makes me feel like we're being watched." They proceeded with even greater caution. The offices were a wreck of overturned desks, shattered glass, and molding papers. In the third office they entered, they found it. Tucked behind a heavy, fallen filing cabinet was a small, alcove-like space, hidden from the doorway. Inside was a sleeping bag, a few empty cans of food, a water bottle, and a stack of notebooks. Leo's camp. Liam knelt, his hands trembling slightly as he reached for the top notebook. It was a standard-issue spiral notebook, its cover warped by damp. He opened it. The pages were filled with Leo's handwriting, a tight, cramped script that filled every inch of the paper. It was a journal, a detailed log of his own secret investigation. "My God, Sarah," Liam breathed. "It's all here." They took the notebooks and retreated to the relative safety of the main floor, finding a spot where they could watch the entrance while they read. Sarah kept watch while Liam began to read aloud, his voice echoing slightly in the vast, empty space. The journal started shortly after Leo had turned 19. He recounted his frustration with the police, his unshakable belief in the Vance's guilt, and his decision to take matters into his own hands. He had faked his disappearance, creating the illusion of a runaway to throw anyone off his trail. He then started living on the streets, taking odd cash jobs, and slowly, methodically began to watch the Vances. His initial entries were a mix of surveillance notes and grief-filled memories of his father. He'd watch Blackwood Manor from the woods, documenting the comings and goings of Elias Vance and the family's security. He described the cold, almost reptilian stillness of Elias, a man who seemed to glide through life without a single wasted motion. Then, about 6 months in, his investigation took a turn. He'd followed one of the older groundskeepers to a local bar and struck up a conversation. After several beers, the old man, bitter about his low pay and the Vances arrogance, let something slip. He talked about the old days under Elias's grandfather, a man he described as hard but fair. But he spoke of Elias's father with fear, and of Elias himself with outright contempt. He mentioned that the family had skeletons, and some of them were buried right on the property. The most crucial part was when the groundskeeper mentioned Arthur Pendleton. The old man knew Dad's name. Liam read aloud from the journal, his voice tight. He said, "That driver fellow. He used to work for the old man years ago before he was a driver. Got himself into a spot of trouble and Mr. Vance Sr. helped him out. Made him loyal. He said Dad and Elias's father were close once. Then they had a falling out. The old man clammed up after that, realized he'd said too much. But it's a start. Dad wasn't a stranger. He was one of them. This changed everything. Arthur wasn't a random victim. He was a former insider, someone who knew the family's secrets. His disappearance wasn't a kidnapping. It was house cleaning. Leo's investigation became more focused, more dangerous. He broke into the estate's administrative offices, stealing old employment records. There, he found it. Arthur Pendleton, listed as a logistics consultant and personal driver for Elias Vance's father. For a period of 10 years, the exact 10-year gap in Arthur's work history. Logistics consultant, Sarah snorted. That's a fancy name for problem solver. The journal then detailed Leo's discovery of the mill. He realized it was the perfect blind spot on the estate, unwatched and forgotten. He set up his camp here and began to focus on the mill's history. He learned that Vance Industries had used the adjacent creek as a dumping ground for industrial chemicals for years, long before environmental laws had any teeth. The water was heavily polluted. That was the secret his father knew. Not just knew, he was a part of it. Found Dad's real logbook. Liam read on, his voice dropping. He kept it hidden in a lockbox in our old storage unit. I always had a key. It wasn't a driver's log. It was a record of payments, dates, and locations. Bribes to inspectors, payoffs to locals, and chemical dumping schedules for this very mill. He was their bagman. But the last few entries are different. He writes about wanting out, about being clean for me. He mentions a new land deal the Vances were planning. They wanted to develop this part of the property, sell it to a resort company. To do that, they'd need environmental clearance. They couldn't afford for anyone to test the water. They couldn't afford for my father and his knowledge to exist. The final entries were a frantic, paranoid scrawl. Leo had found evidence of recent digging near the creek bed. He believed they hadn't just disposed of records. They'd buried physical evidence, barrels of toxic sludge that wouldn't break down. He'd been trying to get samples, proof to take to the authorities, when he realized he was being watched. The Vance's new security team wasn't just patrolling the main house. They were sweeping the woods. They were hunting for him. The very last entry was written in a shaky, rushed hand. They're here. I can hear them in the woods. They know I have the logbook. I managed to call Mark, told him what I could. Told him to send the recording to that reporter, O'Connell, if I don't make it out. It has to be him. I'm hiding the logbook. If you're reading this, it's in the heart of the machine, where the pulp used to be made. They're coming. I think that's Elias with them. Oh God, Dad. I'm sorry. Liam closed the notebook. The silence in the mill was deafening. The story was no longer about a missing man. It was about a corporate conspiracy, a murder, and a son who had died trying to find justice for his father. The heart of the machine, Sarah said, her eyes scanning the vast chamber. The pulpier. That would be in the basement. The very belly of this beast. They found a set of concrete steps leading down into the darkness. Liam switched on his powerful flashlight, its beam cutting a swath through the oppressive black. The basement was a damp, cavernous space, filled with hulking, monstrous machinery. The air was thick with the smell of mold and stagnant water. In the center of the room was a gigantic, vat-like machine with a series of massive, rusted blades at its bottom. The pulpier. He hid it in there, Liam said, shining his light into the dark, cavernous interior. But as the beam moved across the floor, it caught something else. Scuff marks in the thick dust, and a dark, reddish-brown stain on the concrete near the base of the machine. A stain that had soaked deep into the porous stone. Sarah knelt, touching the edge of the stain. She didn't need to be an active detective to know what it was. "This is where they caught him," she said, her voice hollow. "This is where it ended for Leo." A sudden noise from the floor above made them both freeze. It wasn't the wind. It was a distinct human sound. A footstep on the metal stairs they had just descended. Sarah immediately doused her flashlight and drew her weapon, pulling Liam behind the massive pulping machine. They were plunged into near-total darkness, their own breathing sounding impossibly loud. More footsteps, slow and deliberate, descended the stairs. Then, a powerful flashlight beam sliced through the darkness, sweeping across the basement, playing over the rusted machines. Two figures emerged at the bottom of the stairs. Even in the gloom, Liam could recognize the tailored suit and confident posture of the man in front. It was Elias Vance. The man beside him was large and broad-shouldered, clearly his security. "I thought I heard something," the security man said, his voice a low growl. "This place is falling apart." "It's full of noises," Elias replied, his voice calm and cultured, a terrifying counterpoint to the scene. He swept his flashlight beam around the room, and for a heart-stopping moment, it rested on the pulpier, a few feet from where Liam and Sarah were hiding. "Still, it pays to be cautious. Our new partners are coming to survey the site next week. We need to make sure there are no more surprises." The beam moved on. "Just check the perimeter," Elias commanded. "I want to make sure the old entrance is still sealed." The security guard grunted and began a slow walk around the edge of the basement. Elias remained at the foot of the stairs, his flashlight beam methodically scanning the machinery. Liam and Sarah were trapped, pressed into the cold, rusted metal of the machine where Leo Pendleton had hidden his last hope and likely shed his last blood. The hunter had walked into the lion's den, and the lion had just come home. The darkness behind the pulping machine was absolute, a thick, suffocating blanket that seemed to muffle sound and stretch time into an unbearable elastic band. Liam pressed himself against the cold, flaking rust of the machine, trying to control the frantic rhythm of his breathing. Beside him, Sarah was a statue of coiled tension, her gun held in a steady, two-handed grip. The sweeping beam of Elias Vance's flashlight was a predatory eye, searching the shadows, and every time it passed near their hiding spot, Liam's muscles screamed with the effort of remaining perfectly still. The heavy footsteps of the security guard began their slow circuit of the cavernous basement. Each crunch on the debris-strewn floor was a hammer blow against Liam's nerves. They were on the far side of the room, but moving steadily closer. Elias, meanwhile, remained near the stairs, his flashlight beam now focused on the concrete floor. It settled on the dark, ugly stain near the base of the pulpier. Liam saw Elias's posture change, a subtle stiffening of his shoulders. He took a few steps closer, his expensive shoes silent on the dusty floor. He lowered the beam, examining the stain with a detached curiosity, like a biologist studying a specimen. "Sloppy?" Elias murmured to himself, his voice a soft, chilling indictment in the vast, silent room. He nudged the edge of the stain with the toe of his shoe. The guard's footsteps were getting closer. He was perhaps 50 feet away, his own light now sweeping along the wall nearest to them. There was nowhere to run. The only way out was up the stairs where Elias Vance stood like a sentinel. Sarah leaned in, her lips so close to Liam's ear He could feel the warmth of her breath. "When he gets to the other side of this thing," she whispered, her voice barely a tremor of sound, "I'm going to make a noise over by the far wall. It'll draw the guard. That's your window. You go for the stairs. Don't wait for me. Just get out and run. Get the journals to the police. Go." Liam's mind reeled. "No," he breathed back. "I'm not leaving you. Don't be a fool, O'Connell," she hissed, her voice a whip crack of command. "This is the only play we have. The story is in those notebooks. It doesn't matter what happens to us. It matters that the story gets out. Now shut up and get ready." The guard's footsteps were almost upon them now, just on the other side of the massive machine. Liam's body was a taut wire of adrenaline. He could hear Sarah fumbling in her pocket, her fingers closing around something small and metallic. A coin. Just as the guard's light began to spill around the edge of the pulpier, Sarah flicked the coin with practiced strength. It sailed through the air and clattered against a pile of discarded metal pipes on the far side of the basement. The sound was sharp and loud in the oppressive silence. "What was that?" the guard barked, his light instantly swinging towards the noise. "Go check it out," Elias commanded, his own light following the guard's. This was it, their chance. As the guard moved away from them, Sarah gave Liam a firm shove. "Go! Now!" Liam didn't hesitate. He burst from behind the machine, his legs pumping, his mind a white-hot blank of pure survival instinct. He sprinted for the concrete stairs, his boots slipping on the dusty floor. Elias, caught by surprise, spun around, his flashlight beam catching Liam full in the face, blinding him. Liam charged on, lowering his shoulder like a football player. He collided with Elias just as the man was raising a weapon of his own. The impact was jarring. Elias stumbled backward, his gun firing with a deafening roar, the shot going wild and ricocheting off the ceiling, sending a shower of concrete dust down on them. At the same instant, Sarah stepped out from behind the pulpier. "NPD, drop it, Vance," she yelled, her own voice a powerful, authoritative cannon blast that echoed through the basement. The guard spun back around, raising his weapon towards the new threat. But Sarah was faster. She fired twice, two sharp, distinct cracks. The guard grunted, his gun clattering to the floor as he collapsed. Elias had regained his footing and was raising his gun again, this time aiming squarely at Liam, who was scrambling up the first few steps. But Sarah was already moving, closing the distance. She didn't fire. Instead, she slammed her body into Elias, using her momentum to shove him off balance. He stumbled again, his arms flailing, and fell backward onto the concrete stairs, his head hitting the edge of a step with a sickening, wet crack. He lay still, his flashlight rolling away, its beam pointing up at the ceiling like a lonely spotlight. Silence descended, absolute and profound. It was broken only by Liam's ragged gasps for air. He stared down at Sarah, who was checking Elias for a pulse, her face grim. "He's alive," she said, her voice strained. She looked over at the guard. "That one, maybe not." She took out her phone. "I've got a signal. I'm calling this in. The real police this time." As she made the call, her voice calm and professional as she reported shots fired and requested backup and medical, Liam's adrenaline began to recede, replaced by a deep, shuddering shock. He looked at the two men on the floor, the tools of their violent trade lying useless beside them. Then he looked at the pulping machine, Leo's final resting place. "The logbook," he said, his voice hoarse. "It's still in there." He found a rusted service ladder on the side of the machine and, with Sarah keeping a watchful eye, he climbed up and peered into the cavernous vat. It was dark and smelled of rust and something else, something foul. He used his phone's flashlight, the beam cutting through the gloom. And there, wedged between two of the massive, rusted blades at the bottom, was a waterproof oilcloth package. He carefully climbed down into the pulpier, the metal groaning under his weight. His feet touched the bottom, and he felt a sickening squelch. He didn't let himself think about it. He grabbed the package, his fingers closing around the hard, rectangular shape within. It was the logbook. He tucked it safely inside his jacket and climbed out, trying not to look down. By the time the sirens grew from a distant wail to a deafening chorus outside the mill, Liam and Sarah were sitting on the top step of the basement stairs, the notebooks and the logbook between them. The first uniformed officers found them there, two grim-faced figures in a concrete tomb, surrounded by the wreckage of a 5-year-old crime. The aftermath was a whirlwind. The mill became a massive crime scene. Elias Vance was taken to a hospital under heavy guard, and his security guard was pronounced dead. Forensics teams descended on the basement, and what they found in and around the pulping machine confirmed their darkest fears. They found Leo Pendleton, or what was left of him, but they also found the logbook. Arthur Pendleton's final testament was an explosive, meticulously detailed record of the Vance family's crimes. It detailed years of illegal chemical dumping, listing dates, quantities, and the names of the shell corporations used to falsify waste manifests. It also detailed the bribes, the threats, and the political maneuvering used to keep it all secret. The new resort deal was the catalyst. Arthur, consumed by guilt and a desire to give his son a clean legacy, had tried to use the logbook as leverage to get out, to get a payout that would let him and Leo disappear and start over. He hadn't counted on Elias Vance's ruthlessness. The trip of no return was a trap. Elias had lured Arthur to a secluded spot near the river, under the pretense of making a deal. There, they forced him, at gunpoint, to drive his own cab, with his own body in the trunk, into the deepest part of the Blackwood River, a section that was notoriously difficult to drag because of underwater caves. It was a weighted coffin, sent to a watery grave. They had made him an active participant in his own disappearance. The logbook, combined with Leo's journals, was an irrefutable mountain of evidence. The district attorney, seeing a career-making case handed to him on a silver platter, moved fast. Warrants were issued. The Vance empire began to crumble. State environmental agencies descended on the property, and their tests of the water and soil revealed decades of criminal pollution, a toxic legacy that had poisoned the land for generations. The media frenzy was shark-like. 2 weeks later, a specialized dive team, guided by the information in the logbook, located Arthur Pendleton's yellow cab, number 237, almost 150 feet down, wedged in the mouth of an underwater cave. When they brought it to the surface, water streaming from its rusted frame, it felt like the whole city was holding its breath. They found Arthur's remains, along with a weighted briefcase full of the documents he'd been trying to trade for his freedom. Liam O'Connell sat in his studio, the world outside his window a clamor of news vans and ringing phones. He ignored them all. In front of him, his editing software was open, a new timeline laid out. This would be the final episode of Echoes of the Lost. He wouldn't be making any more. He hit record. Epilogue narration. There's a concept in physics. Liam's voice, steady and clear, filled the quiet of the studio. It's called an echo. It's a reflection of sound, arriving at the listener sometime after the direct sound. For 5 years, there was only silence around the disappearance of Arthur and Leo Pendleton. Terrible, deafening silence. But the lost leave echoes. A desperate, terrified phone call from a son who refused to let his father be forgotten. The quiet rustle of pages in a hidden journal. The silent testimony of a logbook buried in a tomb of rust. These were the echoes of the Pendletons. They were faint, and it took a long time for them to reach us. But when they did, they were loud enough to bring down an empire. The story of the trip of no return is over. Elias Vance will likely spend the rest of his life in prison, as will several of his associates. The land they poisoned will take generations to heal. It's a story of justice, but it's not a story with a happy ending. There is no happiness in a father and son being laid to rest in a quiet cemetery, their names finally cleared, their lives still stolen. We search for the lost, we tell their stories, not because we can bring them back, but because they deserve to be heard. Their echoes deserve to be answered. This podcast was started to give a voice to those echoes. And now its work is done. He paused, taking a deep breath. My name is Liam O'Connell. Thank you for listening. He hit stop. He exported the file and uploaded it, scheduling it to post in the morning. Then he shut down his computer, plunging the studio into darkness. A few days later, as he was packing the studio equipment into boxes, an envelope was slipped under his door. There was no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a short, typed message. "Thank you. You answered the call. Now they can rest." It was signed, simply, Mark, Leo's friend, the one who had sent the echo out into the world. Liam folded the note and put it in his pocket. He looked out the window. It was a bright, clear autumn day. A good day for a drive. A good day to start a new trip, one with no particular destination, but with the ghosts of his past finally, blessedly at peace.